Chapter 1. The Child of Shadows. In the unyielding glare of twin suns, the sands of Tatooine shimmered like molten gold, endless and indifferent. Beneath their oppressive light, a boy was born, small and silent, his cries swallowed by the wind and the whispering dunes. His mother, weary and tethered by chains of servitude, held him as though the heat of the day might sear away his very soul. Yet in that fragile chest, beneath the rhythm of human breath, there stirred something older, something vast and uncountable. The Force had noticed. From the moment of his first gasp, the boy was marked. Eyes, wide and unformed, reflected more. Than the harsh desert skies they reflected possibility, rupture, and the slow unfurling of destiny. Around him, shadows danced with a sentience all their own. The suns cast no warmth upon him. Instead, they illuminated a subtle discord, a trembling, in the very lattice of life. Creatures of the sand and night recoiled, sensing the tremor of power that neither promised nor threatened. They only watched, silent, patient, eternal. It was whispered by traders in distant stars, by moisture farmers who saw too much and knew too little, that this boy was the chosen one. Some said he would bring balance. Others whispered that he would bring ruin. Prophecies were as endless as the desert's horizon, but none could see the truth clearly. The Force itself murmured, in ambiguity, neither forbidding nor blessing, only observing. And so the child grew, not knowing the weight of eyes that watched from across galaxies, eyes that traced the pattern of shadows and light upon his face. He was called Anakin, and yet the name was merely a vessel for what the Force had placed within him. Each motion he made, each hesitant step in the dust, each clumsy reach for a toy or tool code beyond the simple measures of childhood. The simplest act of reaching, of grasping, resonated like a drumbeat in the unseen currents of the cosmos. The walls of his home, crude and sun-beaten, shivered with potential. Even the stars seemed to bend their gaze toward this boy, as if the void itself had leaned forward to listen. But the world was cruel, and the world knew nothing of prophecies or destiny. The boy labored in silence, pulling at droids, stacking crates, and carrying the burden of those who claimed him yet knew him not. His mother's eyes, weary with despair and hope intertwined, bore witness to his smallest victories and his most silent defeats. And in those eyes, the boy glimpsed the weight of attachment, the first and most insidious chain, binding the heart even as the Force pulsed within him. Night fell upon the desert, slow and red, and with it came whispers, not from men nor from beasts, but from the Force itself, murmuring in patterns the boy could not yet understand. Sometimes, when the sands were still, he would hear the voices of those long-vanished Jedi and Sith, forgotten, lost, lingering in memory. They spoke of futures yet to be written, of lives entwined and broken, of darkness and light in endless cycles. Though he could not comprehend, the whispers stirred something deep within, both longing and unease, wonder and fear. It was in these hours, when the suns had vanished behind the jagged horizon, that Anakin first glimpsed his own shadow move without him, stretching and twisting like a creature with a mind of its own. He did not cry. He did not run. He only stared, as though the desert itself had peeled back a veil and shown him a secret too vast to name. And somewhere, far beyond the stars, something stirred in recognition. A hand unseen reached for him, not to harm, but to beckon. A promise, unspoken yet inevitable, traced the lines of his fate. The slave quarters offered no sanctuary, yet the boy found moments of quiet that were not human. He would touch a fallen droid, and circuits would respond in ways the makers never intended. He would adjust a lever, and it would move as though compelled by will rather than force. Small, unnoticed miracles occurred around him, unnoticed by those too bound in chains of their own making. These were the first signs of power, of something sacred and terrible, something that would one day break upon the galaxy like a storm. In the market, he was invisible yet essential, a shadow among shadows, a spark in the dust. Merchants ignored him until they could not. Pilots and traders passed and whispered of the boy who could fix a droid with a glance, who could sense the moods of engines, the hidden whispers of circuits, the rhythm of mechanical life, and sometimes, though he did not know it, the Force itself lent its breath to him, guiding his hands, softening obstacles, weaving possibility into every minute act. But the darkness was patient. It lingered at the edges of his vision, not as a threat, but as a quiet invitation. In dreams, he saw endless corridors of flame and steel, figures draped in shadow, their faces hidden, hands outstretched toward him. Sometimes a voice would whisper his name, a voice older than stars, familiar yet alien, promising power beyond comprehension and freedom from chains he did not yet fully recognize. And even as fear trembled in his chest, wonder took root, an unholy seed of destiny that would grow with the passing years. Thus the boy of shadows continued to live, to move, to breathe under the twin suns. He did not know the paths that would unfold, the betrayals that would break him, the horrors and the glories to come. He only knew the tug of destiny and the subtle hum of a universe attuned to him. The Force watched, neither cruel nor kind, only inexorable, marking him, shaping him, testing him, whispering that the sands of Tatooine were but the first of many worlds that would tremble beneath his presence. And somewhere in the vast silence of the cosmos, an ancient voice, trapped in crystal and memory, spoke across time. The boy is shadow and flame. The boy is fear and hope. The boy will rise, and the galaxy will remember, for he carries the weight of stars and the sorrow of countless ages. Watch and tremble. Watch and wait. The prophecy begins, yet the end remains unseen. The twin suns sank into the horizon, painting the desert in the slow burning red of warning and promise. And the boy slept fitfully, unaware that the universe itself had already begun to bend toward him. Chapter 2. Echoes of the Force. The sands of Tatooine were never still. Even when the sun slept beneath the horizon, a quiet movement stirred among the dunes, a rhythm too subtle for ordinary eyes, yet as constant as the pulse of the galaxy itself. The boy, Anakin, slept fitfully, his breath shallow and uneven, as though the Force had chosen to watch him with a vigilant, patient eye. And in that watchfulness, the first echoes of destiny stirred, distant yet insistent, like ripples across a fathomless ocean. It was then that a presence arrived, not in flesh or form, but in a resonance older than any star. A Jedi came, following, the whisper of a life force that throbbed with potential, with a peril that neither prophecy nor reason could yet name. He moved among the dunes as if guided by unseen currents, his robes stirring in the wind, though the wind itself seemed to bow to his passage. The Force had led him here, and though the boy slept unaware, he was already seen, already measured, already chosen. The Jedi knelt, studying the boy with eyes that had seen the rise and fall of empires, the birth and death of worlds. He reached for the child with cautious hands, sensing the power that quivered within the small body. It was both terrifying and luminous, raw and unshaped, like a flame trapped beneath ice. The Jedi whispered, not in words meant for human understanding, but in vibrations that touched mind and soul, probing for answers in the unspoken depths of possibility. Anakin stirred, eyes opening to the dim glow of the evening sky. His gaze was wide, unblinking, as if he had glimpsed not the Jedi but some fragment of the galaxy itself, some fragment of truth too vast for the comprehension of men. He did not speak, he did not cry. He only looked, and in that look, the Jedi sensed a fragile, terrifying brilliance. The first note in a symphony of fate that would stretch across centuries. The boy's connection to the Force was immediate, undeniable yet chaotic, like lightning trapped in a jar. Every instinct, every flicker of movement, was guided by currents unseen. The Jedi reached for him again, this time not with hands but with intention, and in the subtle push and pull of the Force, he felt both hope and dread. The child was not merely gifted, he was a vessel, a crucible, a mirror of light and darkness entwined. The prophecy whispered through the Force once more, fragmentary and elusive, balance will come. Balance will demand fire. Days passed. The Jedi remained, patient, as the desert itself. He began the slow work of teaching, of guiding, of unraveling the raw threads of power that trembled within the boy. Lightsaber forms, meditation, discipline, each lesson was a ritual, a dance between potential and restraint. And yet, even as he taught, the Jedi could not quiet the whispers that crept at the edges of Anakin's mind. They were not entirely his own. These voices, some were echoes of the dark, forgotten and half-remembered, fragments of Sith thought that lingered, like ghosts in the Force. The boy responded instinctively, sometimes with brilliance, sometimes with fear. He could sense the currents of living things, the tremors of droids, the unspoken intentions of men and beasts. In his hands, tools and toys, even broken machinery, seemed to obey subtle commands, as though the universe itself bent toward his will. And yet, the Jedi saw shadows gathering behind the brilliant sphere, attachment, and the hunger for control that the Force warned him could become a path to ruin. At night, the Force spoke in riddles. The boy dreamed of voices that promised power and whispered truth in languages older than any Jedi scroll. He saw visions of fire and blood, of a galaxy teetering on the brink, and in his small hands he felt the potential to save or to destroy. The Jedi watched, silent and vigilant, as Anakin struggled to separate instinct from vision, desire from fear, light from shadow. In one moment of stillness, the boy's gaze fixed upon a broken droid, lying discarded among the sands. Without touching it, he felt its history, its design, its limitations. With a mere thought, the pieces shifted, aligning with an intelligence beyond comprehension. The Jedi knelt beside him, sensing the convergence of mastery and raw chaos. "The Force is strong in you," he whispered, voice trembling not with fear but with reverence. "Stronger than anything I have seen, and more dangerous than you will understand for many years." Anakin's eyes met those of his master, yet in them there lingered a curiosity that was almost alien, as if he could see the future and weigh it against the present. The Force pulsed in tandem with his heartbeat, a drumbeat echoing across time and space. Somewhere, in the shadowed corners of existence, the first stirrings of destiny whispered, "The boy will rise, the boy will fall, the boy will be the fire." In the balance, yet even in this sacred, fragile guidance, the seeds of doubt took root. The boy felt the unfairness of chains, the injustice of power denied, the quiet cruelty of a world unwilling to bend to those who could shape it. Shadows spoke softly, drawing him toward visions of mastery, of vengeance, of the freedom to reshape life itself. The Jedi sensed the pull, but the Force moved beyond him, bending currents he could not yet perceive, murmuring of choices that had not yet been made, and tragedies that had not yet unfolded. One night, as the twin moons of Tatooine rose, pale and distant, the boy awoke to a whisper in the wind, a voice neither kind nor cruel, neither entirely human nor entirely alien. It spoke of fire that could burn without consuming, of life that could thrive amid ruin, of power that demanded sacrifice. He reached for it, and in that reaching, he felt the fragile connection between promise and doom. The Jedi observed, silent, as the child wrestled with forces too vast for understanding. And in that silence, the galaxy itself seemed to pause, holding its breath, waiting for the first tremor in the balance. A prophecy half heard, fragmented, yet undeniable, coursed. Through the Force, the boy's path is uncertain, the boy's heart is fragile. Yet in him, all destinies will converge, and thus the boy remained, at the cusp of potential and peril, guided by the echoes of a force older than memory, older than prophecy. The Jedi taught, and yet the Force itself taught in parallel, through dreams, visions, and half-formed whispers. Every moment was both lesson and warning, every heartbeat a subtle reminder that the boy's life was not merely his own, but the axis upon which galaxies might turn. In the hush of the desert night, a distant voice older than the Jedi, older than Anakin, older than time itself, spoke across the currents of the Force. See him, hear him, mark the trembling of his soul. He carries the weight of light and shadow, the sorrow of generations, and the fire of worlds yet unmade. The path ahead is veiled in shadows. Watch, for the echoes of destiny have begun, and the boy's rise will awaken storms unseen. And beneath the endless stars, the boy slept again, dreaming of hands not yet raised, of lives not yet touched, of shadows that had already begun to whisper his name. The echoes of the Force moved through him, gentle and terrible, heralding a journey whose end neither Jedi nor Sith could yet fathom. Chapter 3: Temptations of the Mind. The galaxy is patient. It waits while stars burn and crumble, while empires rise and fall, and while a single life trembles upon the cusp of destiny. For Anakin, the boy of shadow and flame, the galaxy's patience was a whisper in the mind, a rhythm almost imperceptible, yet unrelenting. Sleep brought no respite, for even in dreams the Force was alive, speaking in riddles, weaving futures that flickered like dying suns and half-remembered fires in the quiet hours. When the twin moons of Tatooine hung like watchful eyes in the sky, Anakin began to feel the first stirrings of doubt. They arrived as shadows, not fully formed, whispering not in words but in emotion, a longing for power, a fear of loss, an unnameable hunger. The Jedi had guided him with patience, their presence a steady current beneath the chaos, but the shadows in his mind were patient too. They did not shout, they did not demand, they only waited, coiling round his thoughts, bending reality with subtle persistence. Visions began to visit him. In one, he saw a galaxy riven with war, fire stretching from one end of the stars to the other. He saw men and women bowing beneath the weight of fear and tyranny, and in the center of it all, a figure cloaked in black, wielding power beyond comprehension. The figure bore his own face, yet it was not fully him. Its eyes held sorrow, and rage intertwined, a mirror reflecting the choices he had not yet made. He awoke with the taste of ash in his mouth and a pulse that throbbed in rhythm with unseen catastrophes. The Jedi spoke of patience and restraint, of duty and sacrifice. They warned of attachment, of fear, of desire ungoverned by reason. And yet, the Force whispered elsewhere, its voice fragmented, half true, half deceitful, carrying promises that seemed too sweet to dismiss. The young apprentice could feel its power. Beyond the limits of law, mastery over life and death, the ability to shield those he loved from all pain. These were temptations, but to a boy of immense potential, they were not merely whispers. They were the promise of certainty in a world of endless uncertainty. Anakin began to sense duality in all things, light and shadow intertwined, duty and desire colliding, hope and fear interwoven like the threads of a tapestry he could not yet read. In the desert wind, in the hum of machinery, in the flicker of candlelight, he felt the pull of possibility. The Force spoke through these signs, though whether it spoke truth or deception was impossible to discern, and the shadows in his mind, ancient and patient, smiled without form, guiding him toward paths the Jedi feared to tread. He was not alone in these visions. Sometimes figures long dead appeared in fragments, a Sith Lord, their face a mask of fire and calm, extending a hand to him, a Jedi spirit, fractured and trembling, warning him of futures yet unwritten. They spoke across time and memory, sometimes contradicting, sometimes reinforcing, a chorus of prophecy and deceit that folded in upon itself like smoke. Anakin listened, and the boy began to learn that power could be an answer to every question, that desire could be a form of certainty, and that love itself was a dangerous currency in the universe. Attachment began to stir in him, quiet and insistent. He thought of his mother, fragile and tethered to the sands. He thought of the slaves who labored beside him, their lives bound to circumstance. He thought of the galaxy, sprawling and unyielding, and wondered if he could protect it, if he could bend reality to shield those he cared for. These thoughts were not evil, not yet, but the Force murmured warnings that desire without restraint is the seed of shadow, that love entwined with fear becomes a chain around the soul, that the mind may betray even the strongest will. Anakin began to experiment, slowly and secretively, testing the limits of what he could bend. Droids obeyed him more readily, machines hummed in rhythm with his intent, and subtle manipulations of the environment bent the ordinary rules. The Jedi observed these talents with caution, and yet even they could not fully measure the breadth of potential that lay within him. The boy's mind was a conduit, a vessel for currents of energy that had not been seen in generations, a crucible of power capable of both creation and annihilation. And in the solitude of meditation, when the twin moons cast silver shadows upon the sand, he felt the pull of the unseen, the voice of the dark and ancient, promising clarity, control, mastery. It spoke not in lies, exactly, but in half-truths that resonated with his longing. You can prevent suffering. You can save her. You can be the hand that shapes fate. Each syllable, each impulse, dripped with temptation, subtle as venom, insidious as fire in the wind. The Jedi could only watch, silent and solemn, as the boy wrestled with forces beyond his comprehension. They offered instruction, they offered guidance, they offered the cold clarity of reason. But the shadows in the mind of Anakin were patient and persuasive, weaving dreams that the Jedi could not touch. And thus, even as the boy knelt in obedience, The seeds of rebellion and desire, of fear and ambition, took root, invisible but inexorably growing. The galaxy, ancient and infinite, hummed with anticipation. Stars aligned in distant orbits, and unseen currents of the Force twisted in recognition. The boy's destiny, fragile yet undeniable, trembled on the edge of awakening. The duality within him, light and shadow, hope and fear, love and obsessions, stirred like a storm beneath the calm of desert nights. And far across the void, in the remnants of shattered holocrons and forgotten prophecies, voices whispered, the boy's mind is a crucible, the boy's heart is a battlefield. All that he touches will bend to him, all that he loves may burn. Watch, for the currents of the mind are the first paths of ruin, and the first steps of destiny. As the twin moons waned, the boy slept again, his dreams thick with visions of flame and shadow, of impossible power and forbidden knowledge. The whispers persisted, gentle and terrible, promising both greatness and despair. And in the silence, the Force itself seemed to pulse with anticipation, waiting for the moment when the boy would learn that thought alone could shape destiny. That desire alone could summon both salvation and destruction, and that the mind, once tempted, is never again free. Chapter 4. The Jedi Trials. The deserts of Tatooine faded behind him, replaced by the cold, polished floors of the Jedi Temple. Here, the air carried not the scent of sand and heat, but the quiet hum of meditation, the subtle rhythm of lives devoted to a discipline older than any empire. Anakin, once a boy of shadow and flame, now walked among these halls as an initiate, carrying within him the whispers of the Force, the weight of prophecy, and the unspoken tremors of fear. Each trial was a ritual, an echo of lessons passed down. Through generations, he moved through them slowly, deliberately, yet the Force trembled around him, bending and twisting at the edges of his control. The young Jedi Masters watched him with caution, awe, and sometimes unacknowledged fear. In the smallest gestures, the lift of a hand, the alignment of a foot, the rhythm of his breath, they glimpsed power that should not yet exist in one so young. Power that could unmake worlds if guided wrongly. He trained with the saber, its blade humming in response to his will, yet more often it revealed the shadow that lingered at the edges of his mind. In each duel, each motion, he sensed not only his opponent, but the weight of destiny pressing upon him. The Force murmured of balance and chaos, of life and death intertwined, of paths that stretched beyond comprehension. And though the Jedi sought to guide him, the boy could feel the pull of unseen currents, whispering of mastery beyond restraint, power beyond law, a freedom that promised both salvation and ruin. Meditation brought no respite. The stillness of the temple was filled with half-heard voices, ancient Jedi, fallen Sith, spirits trapped between worlds, and currents of the Force older than memory. They spoke in riddles and symbols, their meanings shifting like shadows cast upon water. Sometimes the boy would awaken from trance with tears upon his cheeks, or a tremor running through his body, unsure whether the visions were warning or temptation. The Force had begun to teach in its own way, unbound by the rules of masters, unbound by mortal understanding. The trials tested his body, his skill, his precision, but the trials that mattered most tested the mind and heart. The boy confronted illusions of fear, anger, and grief, each one more vivid than reality itself. He faced simulations of lost friends, struck down, loved ones destroyed, cities in ruin, and each time he emerged, he carried the memory of failure, even if only in the shadows of thought. The Jedi called these lessons, but the shadows whispered, "This is not enough. You must act. You must seize. You must not falter." Attachment grew quietly, a soft coil around his heart. He thought of his mother, far away, her chains unbroken, her life bound to despair. He felt longing and guilt entwined, a tether that pulled at him even in the midst of discipline. And in the same breath, the shadows whispered, promising that power could undo suffering, that strength could protect those he loved. Yet the Force murmured its caution. The very desires that made him strong were the same that could destroy him, the same that could warp balance into shadow. The Jedi Masters spoke of patience, of humility, of the surrender required to serve the Force rather than oneself. And yet each lesson was incomplete, a half-truth. For the boy of shadow and flame, every step toward mastery illuminated both promise and peril. His potential was a blade sharpened against the whetstone of discipline. Yet each movement released sparks that could ignite or wound. The corridors of the temple echoed with his progress, yet no echo could capture the storm that began to build in his mind. A storm that whispered of power, desire, and freedom beyond law. In the meditation halls, he encountered visions of himself. In the distant future, the boy saw a figure cloaked in black, a presence both terrible and majestic. Its hands were raised over a galaxy trembling with fear and obedience. And even in the shadowed hall of learning, the Force whispered, "This path is possible. This path is close. This path is yours to choose." Fear and fascination entwined in his chest. He could not yet comprehend what he saw, yet the seed of ambition was planted. Invisible yet relentless. Trials of combat followed, some against simulacra, others against fellow initiates. Each encounter was a dance of precision, strength, and insight. The boy's mind moved faster than the eye could follow, guided by currents in the Force. Yet each success was tempered by glimpses of what lay beyond visions of power, visions of destruction, visions of consequences as wide as galaxies. In moments of triumph, he sensed the undercurrent of fear in others, subtle and unspoken, and wondered if they too felt the shape of the storm that stirred within him. In private, he tested himself. He reached beyond the known limits of the Force, probing currents and energies that should have been forbidden. Droids and mechanisms bent to his will, flames flickered without wind, shadows lengthened at his command. The Jedi had taught skill. The Force taught knowledge that existed beyond their instruction, a knowledge both intoxicating and terrifying. He began to understand that mastery came not from obedience, but from daring, from taking what others feared to grasp. Yet even as he progressed, doubt remained. He wondered if the Jedi truly saw him, or if they only saw what they wished him to be. He wondered if destiny could be shaped, or if it had already been cast in the currents of time. And the shadows in his mind whispered answers that were seductive and false, blending with truth until he could no longer separate one from the other. Each trial became a crossroads, each lesson a test of loyalty, obedience, and self. And so the boy of shadow and flame continued his trials, moving through the temple as both student and enigma. The Force flowed through him in ways that no master could fully measure, bending and shaping the world around him. Yet the shadow persisted, patient, waiting, watching, whispering of paths untaken, of power unclaimed, of choices yet to be made. And far across the galaxy, in hidden places of memory and crystal, ancient voices murmured. The boy walks the corridors of law, yet the currents of shadow move within him. The trials are his, but the choice is not. Watch, for the crucible of destiny has begun, and the first tremors of ruin and salvation are intertwined in his heart. He will rise, he will fall, and the galaxy will tremble at the rhythm of his steps. Thus Anakin moved, practiced, and endured, each day a ritual, each lesson a whisper of fate. And in the stillness of the temple, beneath the echoing arches and silent corridors, he felt the Force pulse in anticipation. For the first tremor of shadow had arrived, subtle, patient, unyielding, a prelude to the storm that would one day sweep across the stars. Chapter 5. The Phantom Mentor, the Galaxy, is older than thought, older than memory, and older than lore. In its hidden folds, in the spaces between stars and time, voices linger, fragments of lives long ended, energies unbound, memories trapped in crystal and shadow. For Anakin, the boy now shaped by trial and duty, one such voice began to emerge, subtle and unbidden, threading through the currents of the Force like smoke through still air. It was a presence neither fully seen nor fully known, a guide who bore neither mercy nor malice, but something older and infinitely patient. It first appeared in dreams, a figure cloaked in darkness, its features obscured, yet familiar, as though he had glimpsed it once in memory he could not claim. It spoke in riddles, in words that were not entirely words, and in feelings that were older than language. Its voice promised power, understanding, clarity. The currents of fate bend for those who dare, it whispered, and the galaxy itself trembles at the edge of your grasp. Take, shape, command. The boy's pulse quickened at the sound, at the idea that the Force could be not only observed, but wielded. The Jedi could not see it. The Masters could not touch it, nor measure its influence, for it was not of the corporeal world, not of the known Force. It existed in the spaces in between, the gaps in perception, the silent corners of thought, the tremors that preceded vision. It guided him subtly, instructing him in ways the temple never had, showing him the secrets of control and manipulation, not merely of the Force, but of circumstance, of emotion, of fear itself. Anakin felt the pull of its counsel most keenly when doubt gnawed at him, when fear of failure clouded his mind. The Phantom Mentor spoke softly. Why serve when you can rule? Why obey when you can command? Its words were not coercion, but illumination, revealing paths not yet open to ordinary eyes, paths of mastery and dominion over both life and death. And the boy, eager to protect, to control, to avert suffering, felt the temptation stir a seed that would grow slowly, unseen, until it became a forest of desire and ambition. Yet the mentor offered lessons in subtlety, not brute force. It taught him to sense weakness, to read currents invisible to others, to anticipate actions before they were taken. Each instruction was a whisper, half truth, half illusion, and the boy absorbed it with fascination. Even as he learned, a part of him recoiled, a distant echo of the Jedi's caution reminding him that the path was perilous. But the whispers were persistent, patient, unyielding, like the pulse of a star hidden behind clouds, slowly burning. Toward eruption, the visions became more tangible as time passed. In moments of meditation, the mentor's presence was tangible, pressing upon him with weight and purpose. Figures of ancient Sith, long thought destroyed, appeared at the edges of perception, showing him histories of conquest, of knowledge gained through transgression, of empires built upon fear and obedience. He saw the perfection of order achieved through dominance, the illusion of stability maintained by terror. And always, the mentor whispered, "It is within your reach. You may wield what others only dream of. The boy's heart trembled with wonder and fear. The lessons were intoxicating, yet dangerous. Each revelation carried both promise and consequence, and the shadows of possibility stretched far beyond his comprehension. The Jedi Masters sensed something shifting, though they could not identify it. They warned of attachment, of the allure, of forbidden knowledge, but the Phantom Mentor had already entwined itself with the currents of his mind. Subtle as air, persistent as tide, Anakin began to act in small ways. He tested his abilities, bending elements of the Force to his will in secret. Droids moved with precision at his thought alone. Fires flickered in response to his emotion. Shadows seemed to lengthen and bow to his gaze. The power was intoxicating, a taste of what might be, yet each experiment drew him closer to the precipice. He felt the thrill of mastery, the elegance of control, and the danger that thrummed beneath every success. Even in companionship, the mentor's lessons lingered. Bonds with others, friends, peers, allies would, viewed through the lens of influence. Subtle manipulation, the shaping of choice. The Force itself whispered that attachment could be both strength and weakness, that love could drive action as readily as fear. The Phantom Mentor's presence reminded him, to serve is to be bound, to command is to be free. Power is clarity, and clarity is destiny. In the quiet moments before sleep, Anakin heard the galaxy itself speak through the Mentor. He heard the histories of worlds long dead, the rise and fall of civilizations, the whispers of beings who had touched eternity and failed. It showed him possibilities not yet realized, futures shaped by ambition, desire, and fear. And each revelation, each glimpse of potential, pulled him slowly toward a truth he could neither reject nor fully embrace. That mastery demanded choice, and that choice would require sacrifice beyond comprehension. The Jedi taught patience, discipline, and service. The Phantom Mentor taught anticipation, cunning, and the shaping of fate. The boy of shadow and flame felt both truths pressing upon him simultaneously, one anchored in lore, the other drifting in currents unseen. And in the tension between them, he began to understand the cost of greatness, and the peril that came with the seduction of knowledge forbidden, and far across the galaxy. In the remnants of forgotten holocrons, in the echoes of ancient prophecies, a voice whispered again. The currents of shadow stir in him. The boy listens. The boy learns. The boy may rise, and the galaxy will bend beneath the weight of his choices. Watch, for the Phantom Mentor is patient. The boy is tempted, and the first steps of ruin and power are entwined in the rhythm of his mind. The deserts of Tatooine, the halls of the temple, the far reaches of the galaxy, all converged in him. In dreams and waking hours, in moments of triumph and doubt, the Phantom Mentor lingered, invisible yet undeniable, shaping the contours of a soul destined for both fire and sorrow. And the boy, unaware of the vast currents he had begun to navigate, only knew the thrill of discovery, the taste of potential, and the whisper of a power older than stars, calling him forward into the shadows of destiny. Chapter 6. Bonds of the heart. The galaxy whispers in currents unseen, in threads too fine for ordinary senses, yet strong enough to bind hearts and shape destinies. For Anakin, the boy now treading the edge of mastery and shadow, such currents began to pulse not only through the Force, but through his very soul. Attachment, once a faint echo in the desert winds of Tatooine, now grew insistent, demanding recognition. Bonds of the heart were forming, fragile and luminous, yet fraught with danger. He first felt it in quiet moments. when the vast halls of the temple were empty and the stillness pressed against the mind. Another presence, living and breathing, moved with intention, their essence intertwining with his, though neither fully understood the nature of the connection. It was not mere friendship, nor simple affection, but a subtle, resonant tether, woven by both choice and unseen currents of the Force. Every glance, every unspoken word, echoed with significance far beyond the awareness of those around him. The Jedi warned against attachment, as they had warned against fear and desire. They spoke of duty, of the surrender of self to the currents of the Force, of restraint as the path to enlightenment. Yet the heart has a language the mind cannot fully command. Anakin felt the pulse of connection as a tidal wave within him, at once thrilling and terrifying. The Force itself trembled, uncertain whether this bond would anchor him or drag him into shadow. He saw visions in which attachment became a crucible. Futures unfolded where love became a chain, where desire became a blade, where protection required betrayal, and protection itself demanded sacrifice too great for ordinary hearts. These were whispers from the Force, or perhaps the shadows themselves, interwoven with truth and illusion, teaching that the depth of care for another could be both salvation and ruin. And the boy, ever attuned to currents beyond ordinary perception, understood that he had glimpsed both the light and shadow of destiny. In quiet training sessions, the tether was felt most keenly. Hands met in practice, the rhythms of thought and motion intertwining, the Force flowing between them in ways ordinary apprentices could not perceive. Each touch, each glance, sent ripples through the boy's consciousness, awakening impulses of protectiveness, jealousy, and longing. Even as he disciplined his body and mastered the forms of the saber, his mind was caught in the subtle web of emotional currents, a testing ground for the powers he had yet to comprehend. Dreams became more vivid. The one he cared for appeared, not only in meditation, but in vision, speaking in silence, offering warmth and companionship, and revealing vulnerabilities that mirrored his own. He saw futures where attachment guided him to triumph, where devotion created harmony, and yet he saw equally the paths where love demanded impossible choice, where desire tore the heart into fragments, and where loss became unbearable. The Force whispered that attachment is a bridge between power and ruin, that the heart itself is a battlefield no master can fully command. Even in solitude, he felt the pull. When meditation left his body still, his mind roamed through possibilities, shaped by care, longing, and fear. The phantom mentor's whispers had taught him the seduction of influence, the mastery over circumstance, and the subtle art of control. But the currents of love introduced a complexity that even shadow could not fully navigate. The Force itself seemed to hesitate, as if the very essence of attachment had power enough to warp destiny. He began to see the interconnection of all things in a new way, not only the patterns of the galaxy and the threads of the Force, but the delicate lattice of emotion that bound living beings together. Each bond was a conduit, each attachment a channel through which power could flow, and yet each also a vulnerability, a point where the shadow could pierce. Anakin understood, with a clarity both exhilarating and terrifying, that the heart was not separate from destiny, but its mirror and its crucible. The Jedi observed the bond with caution, noting the depth of feeling and the subtle intensity it provoked in the boy. Emotion, they whispered in quiet warning, must never surpass discipline. Attachment clouds judgment. Devotion can destroy the self it seeks to protect. And yet the boy felt the Force sing in different ways when close to the one he cared for. He felt strength that was not his own, a resonance that expanded his perception, a clarity tempered by love and fear intertwined. The shadows, patient as ever, took note of this growth. They murmured in tones almost indistinguishable from the force itself. See what drives you. See what you cannot abandon. See the power of care, the peril of desire. And remember, only those willing to act upon what they love may grasp destiny fully. The boy could sense the subtle temptation, the invitation to bend morality and law to safeguard the fragile, luminous threads of the heart. The choice was his alone, yet the shadows would linger, quiet and insistent, until he walked paths they suggested. One night, under the silver gaze of distant moons, the boy felt a surge of the force unlike any before. The tether pulsed between him and the one he cherished, not merely emotional, but almost tangible, a flow of energy that wrapped the galaxy itself around their connection. It was exhilarating, intoxicating, and frightening. In that instant, he realized that attachment was both armor and vulnerability, that love was both shield and blade, and that destiny had already begun to take shape around the lattice of his heart. In the silence that followed, the force seemed to whisper, "The heart is a crucible. The heart is a weapon. The heart shapes destiny as much as skill or strength. Guard it, or it will betray you. Embrace it, or it will consume you." The boy understood this fully, yet he could not resist its pull. He did not yet know the depth of the consequences, nor the shadow that would wait patiently to exploit the very love that defined him. And far away, in realms of crystal, memory, and forgotten holocrons, the voices of ancient force entities murmured across time, "Mark the boy, mark the heart that beats with devotion, for in attachment lies both salvation and ruin. Watch, for the choices of the heart will echo through the galaxy, shaping empires, scattering hope, and lighting the first fires of prophecy. The boy loves, the boy fears. The boy will be tested in ways unseen." Thus the boy of shadow and flame moved forward, bound by training, tempered by discipline, yet guided by currents older than law. He felt the sweetness and terror of attachment, the first true weight of choice, and the quiet, patient whisper of shadow lingering just beyond the warmth of the bond. The galaxy watched, and the force waited, knowing that the lattice of destiny had begun to tighten, that the boy's heart was both a gift and a weapon, and that the path ahead would demand courage, cunning, and the surrender of certainty. Chapter 7. Shadows within the mind of the boy was no longer merely a vessel of potential, it had become a battlefield. Currents of the force ran through him like hidden rivers, at once illuminating and corrupting. Even as he trained under the watchful eyes of the Jedi, even as he nurtured bonds of care and devotion, the shadows within whispered persistently, patient and subtle, teaching lessons that no master could give, revealing truths that were neither wholly light nor wholly dark. These shadows were not entirely new, yet their weight grew with each passing day. They moved quietly, insinuating themselves into his thoughts, blending fear and ambition with flashes of brilliance. The phantom mentor lingered still, unseen but unmistakable, guiding him toward knowledge and insight, testing his patience and restraint. And the boy sensed, with a clarity both exhilarating and terrible, that the shadows were a mirror, reflecting both what he desired and what he feared. The visions came with increasing intensity. He saw worlds in ruin, cities aflame, stars extinguished, and yet always at the center of the chaos was a figure, cloaked in black, commanding fear and obedience with a mere gesture. The figure bore his own face, yet it was not fully him, an echo of what might be, a glimpse of possibility, a warning concealed as prophecy. The boy awoke from these dreams with a pulse quickened, with the taste of ash on his lips, and a subtle sense that the shadows were shaping not only thought, but destiny itself. The Jedi teachings, rigorous and disciplined, could not fully contend with these visions. Patience, selflessness, restraint, they were virtues. Yet the boy now understood that the currents of the Force carried power that could not always be measured by law or tradition. Each encounter, each lesson, each meditation became a crucible, forging awareness of the tension between mastery and morality, between attachment and duty, between desire and fear. The shadows whispered that morality was a construct, a chain forged by others to limit the will of those capable of shaping the galaxy. They showed him the consequences of inaction, of restraint, of obedience to a law that bent slowly, too often at the expense of those he loved. And with each whisper, the boy felt the pulse of ambition stir within him, subtle yet unyielding, a reminder that the Force could be more than a guide, could be a tool, a weapon, a means to shape reality itself. Even in companionship, the shadows pressed. The ties of attachment, which brought warmth and clarity, now also cast a shadow, revealing vulnerability. Each bond, each promise, each emotion became a point of leverage, a subtle path through which fear or desire could be manipulated. The boy's heart was a crucible in which love and ambition met, and the shadows observed patiently, noting where cracks might appear, where hesitancy might bloom into indecision, where fear might blossom into betrayal. In moments of solitude, he began to explore the limits of his influence, reaching into the Force with intent both cautious and daring. Objects shifted subtly, droids obeyed instinctively, and the world itself seemed to yield to the command of his mind. With each small demonstration of mastery, he tasted both exhilaration and dread, the exhilaration of power within reach, the dread of currents he could not yet fully navigate. The shadows whispered again, "You may protect those you love, you may command the galaxy, but power without restraint is fire unbound." The Jedi sensed it too, though they struggled to articulate the change. "Beware the pride that creeps in unnoticed," they warned in muted voices, noting his growing skill, his depth of insight, and the subtle shifts in temperament. They saw glimpses of impatience, flashes of fear, moments where the boy's mind seemed elsewhere, listening to currents beyond their instruction. And though they taught vigilance and caution, they could not reach the subtle threads of shadow that had already woven themselves into his consciousness. Visions of the Phantom Mentor became more insistent, more precise, more compelling, not only in dreams, but in meditation, in fleeting moments of clarity. The unseen guide challenged the boy to act, to test limits, to wield influence in ways that skirted the edges of morality. Each suggestion was carefully crafted, never overt, always patient, illuminating paths that were both promising and perilous. The boy's thoughts began to fracture, splitting between the voice of the Jedi and the voice of ambition, between duty and desire, between love and fear. The shadows revealed the nature of fear itself, not merely the fear of loss, but the fear of inadequacy, of helplessness, of power denied. They whispered that mastery over these currents could avert disaster, could protect, could reshape destiny, and the boy, sensitive to every ripple of the Force, understood that action and inaction were no longer morally neutral, they were decisive, shaping outcomes in ways even the Jedi could not foresee. A memory, long buried, stirred within him. The sands of Tatooine, his mother's voice trembling with worry, the chains of slavery pressing against the lives of the innocent. The shadows wove this memory into temptation, suggesting that the law, the order, the discipline of the Jedi might not be enough, that only by bending rules, by embracing power, by stepping beyond the constraints of teaching, could suffering be prevented. And the boy felt the first, faint pulse of justification for a path the Jedi feared, though he did not yet name it. In the silent corridors of meditation, the Force itself seemed to whisper, "The shadows are not the enemy. They are a reflection. They reveal that which is true and that which is denied. You may walk the path of mastery, but the cost will be revealed only in time. You may rise, but the weight of destiny is both crown and chain." The boy listened, attentive, his heartbeat aligning with the tremor of possibility and peril alike, and far beyond the temple. In places of memory, crystal, and forgotten prophecy, the ancient voices murmured again, "Mark the boy. The shadows move within him. They teach, they tempt, they reveal. Watch the convergence of ambition and fear, of love and restraint. The boy's mind is the first battlefield of his fall, and in the echoes of thought and shadow, destiny waits, patient and inevitable." Thus, the boy of shadow and flame became, aware of the depth of the struggle within, sensing both the peril and the promise. The shadows were patient, persistent, and subtle, guiding him toward choices he could neither fully anticipate nor fully resist. And as he walked the silent halls of the temple, the Force itself trembled, aware that the boy's mind, now a crucible of light and shadow, would soon confront decisions that would shape the galaxy in ways no law, no teaching, and no prophecy could yet fully reveal. Chapter 8: Fires of Desire. The heart is a flame that neither sleeps nor rests, and the mind is its conduit, trembling in rhythm with longing, fear, and unspoken devotion. For Anakin, the fires of desire had begun to stir, quiet at first, flickering at the edges of thought, and yet persistent, patient, demanding acknowledgement. They moved through him as currents of the Force, invisible yet undeniable, shaping every impulse, every motion, every breath. The bonds he nurtured, fragile and luminous, became both illumination and burden. The one he cherished was no longer merely companion or friend, but the axis upon which his heart turned. Every glance, every unspoken word resonated with power, amplifying both hope and dread. In meditation, he felt the pull of destiny intertwining with the currents of desire, a river whose source was emotion, whose flow was ambition, and whose end was uncertain. Desire, the shadows whispered, is not mere longing. It is a force, a prism, through which the galaxy may be shaped. It is a flame that can warm, or one that consumes, and to master it requires courage and cunning beyond ordinary comprehension. The Phantom Mentor spoke again, patient and precise, weaving lessons into temptation. To protect what you love, to shape what you value, you must bend the currents of law and morality. Only those willing to seize may save. Anakin began to test these lessons. He sought control over the elements around him, subtle at first, almost imperceptible, yet increasingly precise. Fires leaped higher or bent to his will. Shadows lengthened at his thought. Currents of energy stirred in resonance with his pulse. The exhilaration was intoxicating, a taste of mastery, yet tempered by unease. He understood, though only dimly, that the fire of desire could be both illumination and destruction, that love could guide as well as blind. The Jedi cautioned, as always warning against attachment, against acting upon impulses born of passion rather than wisdom. They spoke of duty, of surrender, of the tempering of emotion through discipline. Yet the boy had begun to perceive their guidance as incomplete, a framework insufficient for the vastness of the currents he sensed. The galaxy itself seemed to whisper that restraint alone was not enough, that desire, if properly channeled, could be a conduit to true power. Visions intensified. He saw futures shaped not merely by skill or law, but by action guided by longing. Cities saved, lives preserved, and yet also worlds consumed, empires reshaped, and bonds broken in pursuit of a greater end. Each vision carried warning and promise intertwined, a lattice of possibilities he could scarcely navigate. And always the phantom mentor murmured from the shadows, "The flame is not weakness, it is illumination. It is your hand upon the wheel." Of fate, in moments of solitude, the boy's heart raced with both joy and fear. Desire had become a crucible, refining his intentions, testing his resolve. Every heartbeat was a negotiation between love and fear, between hope and ambition, between restraint and action. The currents of the Force moved in resonance with this internal fire, guiding him toward insight, yet threatening to overwhelm him with the intensity of unmotion untempered by wisdom. He glimpsed the nature of sacrifice through desire's lens. To protect, to love, to preserve, he must sometimes defy law. To master, to shape, to prevent suffering, he must sometimes step beyond convention. And in the subtle threads of temptation, he began to sense the first flickers of justification. For acts, the Jedi would condemn acts that the galaxy might call shadow, yet acts that the heart whispered were necessary. Yet the flames of desire were not purely selfish. They intertwined with his devotion, his care, his fear of loss. In this duality, he began to glimpse the paradox that would define him, that love could be a source of both illumination and darkness, that attachment could be a shield and a blade, and that the currents of the heart were as potent and perilous as the currents of the Force. Dreams became more vivid, almost tactile. The one he loved appeared not only in memory but in visions, extending warmth, speaking without words, reflecting futures both bright and catastrophic. The boy could feel the resonance of their bond through the Force, each pulse amplifying both desire and dread. And as he woke from these dreams, he realized that the fires within him were no longer merely feelings. They were a current of power, guiding thought and shaping destiny in ways subtle and undeniable. The Jedi observed changes with concern. Patience, discipline, and duty still guided their teachings. Yet they sensed a tension in the boy, a restlessness, an intensity that law alone could not temper. They warned that passion could lead to imbalance, that unchecked emotion could summon shadows invisible to the untrained eye. And yet the boy, attuned to the currents beyond ordinary perception, felt that the very lessons they offered were insufficient for the vastness of the choices he would soon face. The phantom mentor's whispers threaded ever closer to the heart of temptation. Desire is neither sin nor weakness, it murmured, but a current of mastery. To deny it is to bind yourself. To embrace it is to shape fate. Choose wisely, and all may be preserved. Choose timidly, and all may burn. The boy felt the subtle thrill of power, the quiet allure of action unrestrained, and the tension between moral law and the imperatives of the heart. And in the echoing chambers of forgotten prophecy, where crystals hold memory and the remnants of ancient Sith and Jedi whisper, across time, Voices murmured in unison. The fires of the heart are both illumination and shadow. The boy burns with longing, with fear, with devotion, and with ambition. Watch, for the flame guides him, yet tempts him. He may protect, and he may destroy. The currents of desire are patient, relentless, and infinite. Thus, the boy of shadow and flame walked forward, aware that the heart carries both gift and weapon, that the fires of desire illuminate as much as they consume, and that every choice, made under their influence, echoes through the lattice of destiny. The galaxy watched, the force waited, and the shadows whispered, patient as ever, knowing that the flame of desire would soon illuminate the first true fractures of loyalty, obedience, and morality. Chapter 9, Whispers of Betrayal. The galaxy is a lattice of truths and deceptions, and the currents of power move unseen, threading through the hearts of rulers, warriors, and those who believe themselves steadfast. For Anakin, the boy now on the cusp of manhood, the whispers of betrayal began to slither through the corridors of authority, subtle yet persistent, invisible yet undeniable. The Jedi spoke of duty, of vigilance, of loyalty, yet the shadows spoke differently. Observe, question, act. It began with rumors, faint and distant, carried like drifting smoke through the chambers of the temple and the halls of the Senate. Friends spoke in cautious tones, allies glanced with hesitation, and the young knight in training felt the tension beneath every gesture, every word, every pause. The Force itself trembled at the undercurrent, sensing currents of deception weaving. Through events far beyond his immediate comprehension, he saw the cracks in loyalty. Small at first, easily overlooked, but persistent. Senators coveted influence. Jedi Masters debated principles while blinded to reality. And commanders of armies moved as pieces in games they only half understood. Each whisper of betrayal, each subtle misstep, resonated with the shadows within. Him, illuminating possibilities he had never considered. Possibilities where law and morality might bend to necessity. Where action born of insight could outpace caution. Where justice might demand defiance. The phantom mentor guided him subtly, weaving lessons into temptation. See what others conceal. Understand what they fear. Know what they desire. The boy learned to read the currents of intent, to detect lies in gesture and voice, to perceive the hidden motives that underlay the apparent order. He sensed that the galaxy itself, even as it appeared structured and disciplined, moved in ways beyond the control of law, beyond the understanding of Jedi. In private meditation, visions grew darker, faces of friends twisted with intention, allies plotted in silence, and the very institutions meant to preserve order shimmered with uncertainty and vulnerability. The Force revealed fractures invisible to ordinary sight, cracks that would widen, if left unchecked, exposing the galaxy to chaos, despair, and ruin. And the shadows whispered insistently, "You may intervene. You may shape. You may command. Only those who act may preserve what they cherish." Attachment made the whispers sharper, more pressing. The boy saw the vulnerability of those he loved, the potential for loss and suffering, and felt the weight of responsibility pressing upon him. Each rumor, each secret, each subtle betrayal became a moral crucible, a test not merely of skill but of heart. And as he pondered action, the shadows offered counsel. To protect, you may step beyond law. To preserve, you may choose what others cannot. To save, you may bend morality. The Jedi offered guidance, though their vision was incomplete. Patience, restraint, and observation they counseled. Do not act on emotion. Do not let ambition or fear dictate choices. Yet the boy, attuned to the currents of both light and shadow, perceived the insufficiency of their guidance. The galaxy was not a place of abstract law, but a field of currents, some visible, some hidden, where inaction could be as destructive as aggression, and where hesitation could allow ruin to flourish. Visions became more vivid. He saw battles lost not through lack of skill, but through secrecy and duplicity. Alliances broken by hidden motives, innocence suffering from silence and indecision. The whispers of betrayal were no longer abstract, they were tangible currents, shaping outcomes, influencing hearts, and moving entire worlds toward consequences unseen. And the shadows, patient as always, murmured, "Act, or all will burn. Choose, or be swept aside." In the quiet halls of meditation, the boy realized the depth of the challenge. Loyalty and duty, devotion and morality had become intertwined with deception, ambition, and fear. Every choice had consequences beyond comprehension, and every failure to act echoed through the lattice of the Force. The Phantom Mentor's counsel grew clearer, more insistent. Those who wait are crushed. Those who seize shaped destiny. You may act and you may protect, yet the cost will be revealed only in time. The fires of desire and attachment lent intensity to perception. Every whispered secret, every hidden betrayal, resonated with personal stakes, amplifying both clarity and fear. The boy understood that the shadows were not merely external, they were reflected in his own heart, in the unspoken urges of ambition, the quiet tremors of fear, and the subtle assertion of will that demanded both protection and control. One night, under the dim light of the temple, the boy sensed a convergence of currents. A decision hung on the edge of perception. A moment of choice in which action or inaction would echo far beyond the chambers of learning. He felt the weight of destiny press upon him, the pulse of attachment guiding him, and the shadows whispering patience, cunning, and foresight. The galaxy seemed to hold its breath. Ancient voices, long silent, murmured across crystal, memory, and prophecy marked the boy. The whispers are many, yet he listens. The currents of betrayal move unseen, threading through friend, master, and ally. The boy perceives, and he may act. Watch, for the first fractures of loyalty will shape the choices that lead to darkness. He will be tempted, he will be tested, and the lattice of destiny tightens, invisible and inevitable. Thus the boy of shadow and flame moved forward, attuned. Two currents of duplicity, strengthened by the fires of attachment, yet shadowed by doubt. The whispers of betrayal threaded through every decision, every thought, every heartbeat. And the galaxy, vast and silent, waited as the first tremors of moral fracture, of hidden manipulation, and of the inevitability of choice began to echo through the lattice of destiny. Chapter 10. The Edge of Temptation. The currents of the Force have many edges, some jagged and sharp, others subtle, almost invisible, yet all capable of cutting the heart and mind alike. For the boy of shadow and flame, the edge of temptation began to press against him, insistent, patient, and invisible to those around him. It was neither sudden nor loud. It did not announce itself with fanfare, but whispered in the quietest moments, in breaths drawn alone, in glances that lingered too long, in thoughts that stirred beneath discipline and law. The Phantom Mentor's presence became more tangible, pressing closer with lessons clothed in shadows. The law restrains. The heart yearns. Power lies not in obedience, but in command. Only those willing to act upon what they desire may shape destiny. Each whisper was a thread, weaving through the boy's perception, guiding him toward action not yet sanctioned by masters, not yet justified by duty, yet increasingly irresistible. He felt the duality of temptation in every pulse of the force. The light called for patience, for order, for the surrender of self to greater currents. The shadows called for immediacy, for action, for the bending of law to preserve what must be preserved. Each choice shimmered with consequence. Restraint could prevent catastrophe, yet hesitation could doom those he loved. Action could save, yet fracture loyalty, morality, and self alike. The fires of attachment intensified the temptation. The one he cherished, vulnerable and dear, became the axis of moral gravity. Drawing him toward decisions the Jedi would condemn, yet instinct and care made necessary. Every whisper of fear, every pulse of longing, every shadow of doubt intertwined with the whispers of the phantom mentor, forming a lattice of influence both subtle and relentless. He began to sense the shape of destiny as something malleable, something he could guide, bend, and command if only he could seize the opportunity. Visions of potential unfolded before him. He saw futures in which he acted decisively, shaping outcomes, preventing suffering, preserving lives. He also saw the costs: trust fractured, companions lost, principles broken, innocence shattered. Each vision bore weight, and the shadows pressed, patient and unyielding. Choose, and you may preserve. Hesitate, and you will lose all. Do not let fear dictate action. The Jedi Council echoed in his mind, yet increasingly distant, as if separated by a veil of perception he could not pierce. Patience, discipline, obedience, all seemed abstract when juxtaposed with the immediacy of consequence. The edge of temptation shimmered before him like a precipice, at once terrifying and seductive, and he felt the pull of gravity, the thrill of possibility, and the fear of failure converging in the quiet recesses of thought. In moments of solitude, the boy practiced mastery of the Force as never before. He shaped elements, manipulated currents, sensed intentions, and stretched his abilities to their outer limits. Each success carried exhilaration, each failure carried dread, and in every triumph, the edge of temptation pressed closer. The knowledge that he could act, that he could seize, that he could bend reality to preserve, to protect, to command. All that you desire is within reach. The shadows whispered. He began to perceive the subtle moral fractures in those around him, hesitation in allies, fear in mentors, indecision in those entrusted with guidance. The whispers of betrayal, the shadows of ambition, and the currents of desire converged, revealing that inaction could carry consequences as dire as misdeed. And in this revelation, the edge of temptation grew sharper, more insistent, more real, like the pull of gravity at the precipice of a star. Attachment, desire, ambition, and fear formed a lattice within the boy's consciousness, a framework through which all decisions now passed. Every heartbeat, every breath, every glance through the Force was measured against the potential to act, to seize, to preserve what mattered, regardless of law or convention. And the shadows murmured, patient and certain. The boy must step forward. Only action shapes destiny. Only courage in the face of fear preserves what is loved. The visions became tactile, almost physical. He saw lives teetering on the edge, decisions that could save or doom, and the clarity of choice shimmered like light on water. Hesitation was dangerous, indecision fatal. And as he perceived the vast lattice of consequence, he felt the thrill of power real, immediate, undeniable waiting for him at the edge. The edge of temptation was no longer subtle. It was a presence, heavy in the chest, luminous in the mind, almost tangible, awaiting the first step in the silent chambers of ancient holocrons, in the memory of Sith and Jedi long gone. Voices murmured. Across time, marked the boy, he perceives the lattice of consequence. The edge of temptation lies before him, patient, inexorable, eternal. Watch, for the first steps of surrender and mastery converge. He will be tested, and in that test, the first fracture of obedience will appear. The boy stands at the threshold. His choice will echo through the currents of the galaxy. And so the boy of shadow and flame lingered at the edge of possibility, feeling the pull of destiny, aware that action would shape reality, aware that hesitation could destroy it, aware that the currents of desire, attachment, and ambition all pressed upon him with equal weight. The force waited, patient yet observant, the shadows whispered, persistent yet inscrutable. And the galaxy held its breath, knowing that the first steps toward darkness and mastery were about to be taken. Chapter 11. The Price of Fear. Fear is a teacher older than stars, older than the first currents of the Force, older than the memory of any being who has walked the galaxy. It waits in silence, patient and inevitable, revealing both vulnerability and strength, illuminating paths unseen, and whispering truths that are as bitter as they are necessary. For the boy of shadow and flame, fear began to press not only at the edges of thought, but into the very marrow of being, shaping every breath, every pulse, every heartbeat. It began quietly, in moments of anticipation. The Force carried whispers of danger, subtle and urgent. He felt the tremor of uncertainty in the lives of those he loved, the fragility of attachments, and the hidden threats that lurked beyond perception. Even as he trained, even as he meditated, even as he nurtured bonds of care, fear seeped into the lattice of thought, inseparable from desire, inseparable from attachment, inseparable from the currents of destiny itself. Visions intensified, more vivid than before. He saw worlds consumed by chaos, allies crushed under the weight of indecision, innocents suffering because power had been withheld for fear of transgression or consequence, and the shadows, patient and eternal, whispered with certainty. To save, you must act. To protect, you must command. Fear binds, but action liberates. The boy began to perceive the true price of fear. It was not merely hesitation, it was paralysis of the soul, erosion of clarity, corrosion of resolve. It whispered doubts, magnified every uncertainty, and cast every choice into a shadow that grew heavier with every heartbeat. Fear, the Force, seemed to murmur, is a currency, and those unwilling to pay it with courage may find all that they love lost to ruin. Attachment sharpened the lesson. The one he cherished was vulnerable not in absence, but in presence, exposed to currents of consequence beyond mortal perception. Every whisper of danger resonated like a drumbeat in the heart, a pulse that accelerated both desire and dread. The boy understood that fear was not a distant threat, but a fire that consumed the mind and guided decisions with silent insistence. To deny fear was impossible, to act without it, improbable. The phantom mentor's influence grew subtler, threading instruction into temptation. Fear is neither sin nor weakness. It is a signal, a guide. Act, and you may preserve what is fragile. Hesitate, and all will burn. The shadows framed the lesson with clarity and precision, showing that the paths of action, though fraught with consequence, were the only paths that could protect life, attachment, and destiny itself. The Jedi's counsel, though unwavering, seemed increasingly distant. Patience, law, and morality were virtues, yet insufficient for the immediacy of the threats the boy perceived. He sensed that inaction carried its own peril, that restraint could be as devastating as transgression. Fear had become a teacher, yet also a master, revealing truths the mind could not fully accept, yet shaping every pulse, every thought, every decision. Dreams and meditations became crucibles. In one vision, he saw a life torn from him, a world consumed by the consequences of hesitation. In another, action taken without law or permission preserved life, yet fractured trust and sowed the first seeds of alienation. Each vision, each whisper, each tremor of the Force reminded him that the price of fear was eternal vigilance, relentless resolve, and the willingness to act where others would falter. The boy began to experiment, testing limits both within and without. He reached into the currents of the Force with precision, subtlety, and a quiet intensity, moving objects, influencing thought, sensing currents of danger before they arrived. Each act was both exhilarating and terrifying, revealing the potential to shape outcomes, to preserve, to protect, and yet demonstrating the cost, the first fractures of obedience, the quiet corrosion of certainty, the growing pulse of ambition intertwined with fear. Attachment, desire, and ambition converged with fear into a lattice of decision. The boy understood that every choice bore weight beyond comprehension. To act was to assume responsibility. To hesitate was to invite catastrophe. Every pulse of fear illuminated both risk and possibility, demanding vigilance, demanding courage, demanding that the currents of morality and law bend to necessity. One night, in silent meditation, the boy felt the presence of mortality and consequence more sharply than ever. The Force carried whispers of death and suffering, subtle tremors of inevitable loss, and the shadows, patient and eternal, spoke clearly. Only those willing to face fear may shape destiny. Only those willing to step beyond hesitation may preserve life. Only those who act will survive the crucible. Ancient voices, reverberating through holocrons, crystals, and the memory of forgotten Sith and Jedi murmured across time, "Mark the boy." Fear presses upon him. The price is rising, yet he perceives it. Witness the shaping of courage and the corrosion of hesitation. The lattice of destiny is fragile, and in fear lies both temptation and guidance. He stands at the threshold. One choice will define the convergence of light, shadow, and the heart's flame. Thus the boy of shadow and flame walked forward, acutely aware of the weight of fear, the peril of hesitation, and the necessity of decisive action. The currents of desire, attachment, and ambition intertwined with fear, forming a lattice that would guide, test, and define every choice to come. The galaxy held its breath, the shadows waited patiently, and the first tremors of destiny, heavy with consequence, echoed through the Force, shaping the boy who would become both savior and destroyer. Chapter 12. The Siren of Power waits, not in the halls of law, nor in the words of masters, nor in the patience of the obedient. It waits in silence, in shadows, in the subtle pulse beneath every heartbeat, in the currents of the Force unseen by the cautious eye. For the boy of shadow and flame, the siren of power began to call, its voice neither gentle nor cruel, but persistent, irresistible, and inevitable. A melody that stirred both hope and dread in equal measure. The phantom mentor's whispers deepened, coiling around thought like tendrils of smoke. All that you desire lies within reach. The currents bend for those who grasp. The galaxy may be shaped, lives may be preserved, attachments may endure, if only you dare. And with each utterance, the boy felt the tendrils of temptation tighten, drawing him closer to the precipice where law, duty, and morality met desire, fear, and ambition. Visions unfolded, luminous and terrifying. He saw outcomes shaped by decisive hands, battles averted, innocence preserved, loved ones spared. He saw the ease of command, the satisfaction of mastery, the certainty of results. Yet these visions bore shadows thrust, fractured, bonds broken. The first tremors of betrayal, and the heavy price of choices made in defiance of law. The siren of power was seductive because it promised both preservation and control. Yet it demanded a cost that the boy could scarcely measure, desire and fear. Entwined within him, forming a crucible in which each thought, each pulse of the heart, each breath was tested. The currents of the force responded to his intent, flowing with him or resisting, a mirror of his own moral fracture. Attachment amplified the siren's call. The one he cherished, vulnerable and dear, became both motivation and justification. A lodestone pulling him toward action beyond the sanction of masters. The Jedi's counsel echoed faintly, distant and imperfect, patience, discipline, restraint. Yet each echo seemed inadequate in the face of the immediacy of danger, the tremor of mortality, and the imperatives whispered by the shadows. To act was to preserve, to hesitate was to invite loss. The siren of power, patient as the stars themselves, whispered, "The law cannot save, the masters cannot save, only you may save." In meditation, he reached into the currents with unprecedented subtlety and precision. Objects obeyed without effort. Subtle manipulations shaped outcomes before they occurred, and the galaxy trembled faintly beneath the pulse of his intent. The exhilaration was intoxicating, a proof of mastery, yet tempered by unease. Each act of command carried both illumination and shadow, revealing the first cracks in loyalty, in morality, in obedience, yet hinting at the possibility of preservation, of control, of power wielded with purpose. Fear and desire became indistinguishable, entwined with ambition into a lattice that guided thought and action. The boy began to perceive the calculus of consequence. Hesitation might protect law, yet imperil life. Obedience might preserve order, yet allow suffering. The siren of power did not demand indiscriminate action. It demanded choice, courage, and recognition that every act bore cost, yet offered mastery. Dreams and visions coalesced into clarity. He saw futures illuminated by decisive action, where the currents of attachment, ambition, and fear were aligned. He saw the preservation of those he cherished, the shaping of destiny itself, yet also glimpsed the shadows of consequence. Trust fractured, bonds strained, moral certainty eroded. The siren of power, patient and eternal, offered a path that promised salvation and mastery, yet whispered of cost only fully known in retrospect. The boy felt the weight of inevitability pressing upon him. The currents of attachment and ambition pulsed in rhythm with the siren's call. Each heartbeat was a negotiation between preservation and transgression, between light and shadow, between obedience and mastery. And as he listened, patient and deliberate, He understood that the path offered by the siren was not sudden nor forceful, but subtle, persistent, inevitable. The force itself seemed to tremble, aware of the convergence of currents. The shadows whispered, as if acknowledging a moment yet to be fully realized. You may seize, or you may falter. The choice lies with you, yet the lattice of consequence will follow your intent. The boy's pulse aligned with the resonance of desire and fear, and in the quiet spaces of thought, he perceived both the peril and the promise, the cost and the illumination, the fragility of law and the certainty of action. Ancient voices, echoing through holocrons, crystal and memory, murmured across time. Mark the boy. He perceives the currents of power. The siren calls, patient, subtle, eternal. Observe, for the first steps toward mastery and corruption converge. The boy will act, and the lattice of destiny will tremble. Light and shadow, loyalty and betrayal, obedience and ambition intertwine. The currents of attachment and fear guide him. The path unfolds. Thus the boy of shadow and flame moved forward, acutely aware that power waits not for permission, but for grasp. Not for law, but for intent. Not for patience, but for courage. The currents of the force shimmered beneath his pulse. The shadows whispered patiently, and the galaxy held its breath, waiting for the first step upon the path where mastery, desire, and moral fracture converge. The siren of power awaited, patient and eternal, for the boy to choose, and the first tremors of destiny, heavy with consequence, began to echo through the lattice of the force. Chapter 13. The shadows embraced her. Shadows wait for patience to wane, for fear to deepen, for desire to sharpen. They do not shout, they do not seize. They are subtle, insidious, patient. And for the boy of shadow and flame, the shadows began to stir with insistence, coiling around thought and heart, whispering the first truths of power, the first promises of mastery, the first seductions of destiny beyond law. It was in the quiet moments, the breaths drawn alone, that the embrace of shadow first took shape. The boy felt currents he could neither name nor resist, flowing through the marrow of his being, shaping thought, amplifying intent, and rendering law and discipline distant, abstract, insufficient. The force itself seemed to pulse in resonance with the shadows, reflecting the convergence of fear, attachment, and desire. Visions unfolded with terrifying clarity. He saw lives preserved through decisive, unorthodox action, outcomes shaped not by obedience, but by will. Yet the price shimmered at the edges of perception, trust fractured, bonds strained, innocence lost, morality eroded. The shadows whispered, to act is to shape, to hesitate is to yield. The cost will be revealed in time, but the currents of destiny favor those who seize. Attachment lent intensity to the whispering. The one he cherished, vulnerable and luminous, became both reason and justification. Every threat perceived, every tremor of fear, every pulse of longing intensified the shadow's insistence. The boy understood that love and fear were inseparable in the currents of temptation, that to protect was to command, that to preserve was to bend, and that hesitation would allow disaster to bloom unseen. The phantom mentor's counsel threaded through the shadows, subtle yet inexorable. The law restrains, the masters instruct, the cautious falter. Only those willing to step beyond may preserve what is dear. Only those who embrace the shadow may master consequence. And with each whisper, the boy felt the pull of choice tighten like a coil, aligning action, fear, and desire in a lattice. both luminous and dark. Fear pressed with new weight, not abstract fear, but the terror of loss, of helplessness, of failing to protect what the heart had deemed sacred. The boy perceived the fragility of life in ways the Jedi could not teach. He saw the cost of hesitation, the weight of restraint, the slow erosion of possibility when the currents of action were left untamed. And the shadows murmured insistently, patient and eternal, "The first act shapes the rest. Do not falter, do not hesitate." In solitude, he tested the boundaries, subtle manipulations of the Force, minute nudges, precise motions that defied convention, each act a small crossing of thresholds, a probe into power and consequence. The exhilaration was immediate. The awareness of control, of mastery, of possibility, lit the shadows with promise. Yet each act left tremors, subtle fractures in obedience, first hints of moral erosion, first tendrils of divergence from law and duty. The siren of power intertwined with the shadows, weaving temptation into purpose. It promised clarity in action, preservation of attachment, mastery over fear. Yet its lessons were ambiguous, its guidance both illumination and peril. To grasp its counsel was to act decisively, yet the boy felt the cost with every heartbeat. The currents of the Force responded to the merging of shadow, desire, and fear, and in response, the boy's pulse quickened, awareness sharpened, and understanding deepened. Visions became tactile, almost corporeal. He saw outcomes determined by decisive, unconventional choices, bonds preserved, life spared, catastrophe avoided. He also saw the erosion of trust, the first fractures of morality, the quiet tremors of consequences that would one day grow into storms. And in these visions, the shadows whispered with relentless clarity, "The first step is irreversible. The first act is the embrace. You may preserve, and you may command, yet the lattice of consequence is eternal." The Jedi's voice lingered in memory, distant yet insistent, patience, restraint, adherence to law. Yet each echo seemed fragile, ill-equipped to contend with the immediacy of risk, the weight of attachment, and the seduction of mastery. The boy sensed that the lattice of consequence was unyielding, and that only those willing to act, willing to seize, willing to embrace the shadow, could shape the outcomes of attachment, fear, and destiny. Ancient voices murmured through holocrons, crystal, and memory, "Mark the boy. The shadow stirs and waits. The first embrace begins. Observe the convergence of desire, fear, and attachment. The first act will fracture obedience, shape consequence, and mark the threshold of destiny. The currents of law and morality bend to action, and those who hesitate will be swept aside. Watch, for the boy steps toward shadow, and the lattice of fate quivers beneath him." Thus the boy of shadow and flame felt the first tangible embrace of the shadows. They pressed, patient and eternal, coiling around thought, pulse, and intent. Attachment, fear, desire, and ambition merged into a lattice that demanded action, courage, and recognition of consequence. The galaxy held its breath. The Force pulsed with quiet awareness, and the boy, standing at the edge of decision, felt the first irreversible steps toward mastery, moral fracture, and the path that would one day crown him Darth Vader. Chapter 14. Flames of conflict. The galaxy burns not only in stars, but in the unseen tensions between hearts, ambitions, and fears. It is a fire that does not consume all at once, but simmers beneath the surface, waiting for breath, movement, and choice. For the boy of shadow and flame, the flames of conflict began to rise. Subtle at first, almost imperceptible, and yet insistent, spreading through the lattice of the Force, echoing the tremors of attachment, fear, and ambition, whispers of unrest threaded through the chambers of power. Senators spoke in measured tones, yet beneath every word lay ambition and dread. Generals acted with precision, yet shadows of doubt rippled through their ranks. Jedi Masters counseled law, duty, and patience, yet their words could not contain the tumult that roiled unseen in currents of consequence beyond their comprehension. And the boy, attuned to the invisible lattice, felt the first sparks of action that would ignite greater flames. The phantom mentor whispered in tendrils of shadow and wind, "Conflict is inevitable. It is both test and teacher. Those who embrace its currents may preserve what they cherish. Those who deny it invite ruin. Watch and act with intent." Each syllable wrapped round the boy's awareness, sharpening perception, heightening both desire and fear, guiding him toward choices that were no longer theoretical, but immediate, tangible, and consequential. Attachment lent heat to the flames. The one he cherished, vulnerable and luminous, became the axis upon which moral certainty twisted and fractured. Every threat perceived, every tremor of potential loss, every pulse of longing ignited the currents of the Force in resonance with the shadows. The boy felt the responsibility pressing upon him, heavy as stone, demanding action, demanding courage, demanding mastery over outcomes that no law or counsel could guarantee. Visions unfolded, luminous and terrifying. He saw battles averted through decisive, unconventional acts. He saw systems preserved, lives saved, catastrophes forestalled. Yet with each act came shadows, trust fractured, loyalty strained, the moral lattice bending under the weight of intent. And the whispers murmured, patient and eternal, "The first spark shapes all that follows." The flames consume what is weak, illuminate what is necessary. Fear, desire, and ambition converged in the boy's heart, forming a crucible through which every thought, every impulse, every breath passed. The currents of the Force pulsed in resonance with this inner conflagration, reflecting both the light of potential salvation and the shadow of inevitable consequence. The siren of power beckoned, patient and eternal, its song promising mastery and illumination, yet demanding the weight of moral fracture as currency. The Jedi's voice lingered faintly, distant and fragile, restraint, patience, adherence to law. Yet the immediacy of threat, the tremor of attachment, and the whispering currents of the shadows rendered counsel insufficient. Inaction could yield catastrophe. Hesitation could allow suffering. And the boy, attuned to the lattice of consequence, understood that mastery required decisive movement, even when the cost was unclear. The shadows guided, subtle as breath, persistent as stars. They did not demand violence, yet they illuminated the path where action could shape destiny. They did not promise certainty, yet they whispered of preservation and control for those willing to embrace consequence. Each choice became a test, each act a crucible, each heartbeat a negotiation between law, morality, attachment, and desire. In dreams, the boy saw flames ripple across star systems, sweeping through battlefields and corridors alike. He saw friends falter, allies hesitate, innocents suffer, all traced to moments of indecision. And then he saw the power of decisive action, lives preserved, destinies shaped, attachments maintained, yet trust strained, and moral certainty eroded. Each vision bore warning and promise intertwined, a lattice of possibility as fragile as it was enduring. The currents of attachment, fear, and ambition pulsed through him, sharpening perception, intensifying desire, and clarifying the paths before him. The boy felt the first tremors of consequence ripple outward, subtle yet inexorable, shaping events in ways both immediate and distant, shaping the galaxy as surely as flame shapes the night. And in the whispering shadows, patient and eternal, the first recognition of irreversible choice stirred. Ancient voices murmured across holocrons, crystal, and memory. Mark the boy. The flames of conflict rise. Observe, for every act will ripple. Beyond intention, desire, fear, and ambition converge. The lattice of consequence tightens, and the boy stands at the threshold of action. He may preserve, he may destroy, he may fracture trust and morality alike. Watch for the currents of destiny bend with his choices, and the first sparks of irreversible consequence ignite. Thus the boy of shadow and flame stepped forward, aware that the galaxy itself trembled under currents unseen, aware that attachment, desire, and fear intertwined in ways that demanded decisive action. The flames of conflict licked at the edges, of morality illuminating paths both perilous and necessary. The shadows whispered patiently. The force pulsed with quiet awareness, and the first tangible consequences of choice began to shape the boy's path, leading inexorably toward the destiny that would crown him Darth Vader. Chapter 15. The fractured oaths are the bones of commitment, the lattice of trust that binds the present to principle, the individual to the order, the fleeting heartbeat to eternal purpose. For the boy of shadow and flame, the weight of such oaths had been sacred, unquestioned, absolutor. So he had believed. But the shadows stir quietly, patient and insidious, bending thought and heart until the lattice of law and morality quivers, until the sacred bonds of promise fracture beneath the weight of fear, desire, and attachment. It began subtly, tasks performed with hesitation, instructions questioned in silence, choices made outside the sanction of masters. Each act, small and seemingly insignificant, left tremors in the lattice of trust. Jedi eyes, trained to perceive intention, glimpsed anomalies yet failed to perceive the underlying currents. The boy moved in these fissures, guided by the shadow's quiet counsel. All that binds may bend, all that restrains may yield. Step, and the path will unfold. Attachment lent urgency to moral divergence. The one he cherished, luminous in presence, and fragile in circumstance, became the axis upon which choice pivoted. Every whisper of danger, every tremor of fear, every pulse of desire justified subtle defiance, a preservation here, a correction there, all steps taken with intent but beyond the bounds of law. Each act was a fracture in the lattice, almost imperceptible, yet inevitable in its accumulation. The phantom mentor's counsel intensified. Threading through the lattice like silver smoke, the oath restrains. Duty limits, law confines. Only those willing to step beyond may preserve life. Only those who fracture the binding may command consequence. The boy felt the tension of this truth, its double-edged clarity, each defiance preserved, yet each defiance eroded. Each step toward mastery carried both illumination and shadow, both preservation and cost. Fear became sharper, more urgent, intertwining with desire into a crucible of moral decision. To preserve what was precious required action. Yet action carried consequences that would echo through trust, loyalty, and principle. Inaction, the shadows whispered, was surrender, surrender to loss, surrender to powerlessness, surrender to destiny unshaped. And so the boy walked the lattice carefully, measuring every pulse, every breath, every intent against the necessity of consequence. Visions coalesced in meditation, luminous and troubling. He saw allies falter, innocents suffer catastrophes, unfold all traced to hesitancy and obedience. And he saw the power of decisive, unauthorized action. Lives preserved, bonds maintained, threats subdued. Yet the fractures were evident, trust strained, confidence weakened, the moral lattice bending under the weight of intent. The shadows murmured, patient and eternal, fracture, and you may preserve, fracture, and you may master, fracture, and you take the first irreversible step toward destiny. The boy began to perceive the lattice of consequence as a living structure, fragile yet resilient, illuminated by action yet shadowed by cost. Every choice now bore the dual weight of salvation and fracture, every pulse of intent shaping both outcome and principle. And in the quiet, the shadows whispered insistently, "The oath may be sacred, but preservation is higher. The law may command, but attachment must guide. Step, and the lattice yields to will." The Jedi's counsel, once unwavering, now seemed distant, fragile, incomplete. Patience, law, adherence, virtues in theory, yet insufficient in the immediacy of mortal peril. The boy understood that obedience alone could not preserve life, that law alone could not shield what the heart deemed sacred. The lattice of moral consequence demanded action, courage, and the willingness to fracture bonds that had once seemed eternal. In dreams, the boy saw the first fractures take form. Friends and masters, unaware, witnessed choices that defied principle yet preserved life. Bonds were strained, yet the currents of consequence bent in favor of preservation. The lattice of trust, though scarred, remained functional, yet the echoes of fracture would never fade. And in these visions, the shadows whispered with relentless clarity, "The first fractures are irreversible. The first acts of defiance shape destiny." The boy steps toward mastery and toward shadow. Ancient voices murmured across holocrons, crystal and memory. Mark the boy, observe the lattice of oath and consequence. The first fractures appear. Desire, fear, and attachment converge. He may preserve, yet he erodes the foundations of trust. He may command, yet he bends the sacred. Watch, for the threshold approaches. The boy stands at the edge of irreversible action, and the currents of destiny tremble beneath his intent. Thus, the boy of shadow and flame embraced the first tangible fractures of oath and principle. Attachment, fear, and desire converged into a lattice of moral consequence that demanded courage, calculation, and recognition of cost. The galaxy trembled beneath unseen currents, the shadows whispered patiently, and the force pulsed with quiet awareness. The first irreversible steps toward the path of Darth Vader had been taken, and the lattice of destiny shimmered, poised on the edge of unfolding calamity. Chapter 16. The abyss beckons. The abyss is patient. It waits not for action, but for hesitation. It waits not for folly, but for desire. It waits not for weakness, but for the recognition that the world is neither absolute nor merciful. For the boy of shadow and flame, the abyss began to pulse beneath him, subtle, immense, and inexorable, a presence in the marrow of thought, in the currents of breath, in the trembling lattice of the force. It did not call with rage. It did not demand obedience. It whispered, soft as the dark between stars, all may be shaped, all may be preserved, all may be mastered if only you step beyond fear, beyond law, beyond restraint. And the boy, attuned to the hidden lattice of consequence, felt the weight of potential pressing inward, drawing him closer, inexorably, to the edge where light and shadow would meet in irreversible convergence. Visions unfurled with clarity and terror. He saw worlds preserved through decisive, unorthodox action. He saw friends and innocents spared, catastrophes prevented, destinies shaped. Yet every vision bore shadow, trust fractured, bonds strained, loyalty bent, morality eroded. The whispers of the abyss were patient. The cost is known only when measured. The first step reveals the path. Hesitate, and all is lost. Attachment drew the abyss nearer. Each pulse of care, each tremor of fear, each longing for preservation feeding its gravity. The one he cherished, luminous and fragile, became the axis of his moral universe, and the shadows shaped their counsel around this singular truth. Preservation demands mastery. Mastery demands courage, and courage requires stepping beyond known law. The phantom, mentor's voice coiled through the lattice of thought. The abyss is not void, it is presence, it is power. To master is to act. To preserve is to command. To hesitate is to fall. Each syllable pressed upon the boy's perception, amplifying desire, clarifying intent, sharpening both the brilliance of potential and the depth of risk. And with each passing moment, the abyss pulsed in resonance with the lattice of attachment, fear and ambition. Fear, once an external teacher, now became internal, inseparable from desire. Every breath carried the weight of what might be lost. Every heartbeat measured the fragility of the bonds he cherished. Every thought traced the lattice of consequence in which hesitation equaled catastrophe. The abyss whispered, to act is to preserve, to falter is to destroy, to command is to shape destiny. In the crucible of meditation, he tested the currents, reached deeper, probed further, pushed beyond limits previously unimaginable. Objects yielded, outcomes shifted, events bent subtly to the lattice of intent. The exhilaration of mastery was immediate, intoxicating, undeniable, yet tempered by the awareness of moral erosion. Every act of command carried illumination, yet also shadow. Every act preserved life, yet also fractured principle. The siren of power intertwined with the abyss, coiling around the lattice of thought. It promised mastery, clarity, and preservation, yet its counsel was ambiguous, its cost known only through action. The boy perceived the calculus of consequence with growing acuity. Hesitation could destroy, obedience could fail, mastery could preserve. And so he stood at the edge, acutely aware that the first step into the abyss was irrevocable, and that the lattice of destiny would tremble beneath his pulse. Dreams and visions sharpened into premonition. He saw consequences ripple outward, friends and allies preserved yet distant in trust, enemies defeated yet shadows of betrayal lingering, innocence maintained yet moral certainty fraying. And in these visions the abyss whispered with relentless clarity, the first embrace is irreversible. Step forward, and the lattice of destiny bends to your will. The Jedi's counsel, once absolute, now seemed a faint echo, insufficient to guide amidst the immediacy of fear, attachment, and desire. Patience, law, restraint all were abstract, fragile, and distant. The boy understood that mastery, preservation, and the fulfillment of what he deemed sacred required decisive action beyond sanction, beyond precedent, beyond oath. Ancient voices murmured across holocrons, crystal, and memory. Mark the boy. Observe the currents of the abyss. Desire, fear, and attachment converge. The threshold is reached. He may preserve, he may command, he may fracture trust and principle alike. The lattice of consequence quivers beneath intent. Watch, for the boy steps into the abyss, and the first irreversible currents of destiny flow through him. Light, shadow, obedience, and ambition entwine in his path. The galaxy holds its breath. Thus the boy of shadow and flame recognized the presence of the abyss, patient, immense, and eternal. It did not coerce, it did not demand, yet it illuminated the convergence of power, attachment, fear, and destiny. Each heartbeat, each breath, each pulse of intent drew him closer to the first irrevocable act, the embrace of shadow, the shaping of mastery. The force pulsed in quiet awareness. The shadows whispered patiently, and the boy, standing at the threshold, felt the inexorable pull of destiny, the first step into the abyss that would crown him. Darth Vader, Chapter 17, The Birth of the Dark. The moment of becoming is neither sudden nor explosive, yet it reverberates through the currents of the Force as though 1,000 stars have died at once. For the boy of shadow and flame, the transformation was a convergence of desire, fear, attachment, and inevitability, a coalescence that unfolded slowly, inevitably, beneath the patient gaze of the abyss. In the quiet of the Force, the first breath of the dark side entered fully, weaving itself into marrow, pulse, and intent. The shadows waited, patient and eternal, as the lattice of consequence bent beneath his will. Each act, each choice, each defiance of law and morality had drawn him closer. Each fear faced, and each attachment preserved, had strained the lattice of principle to its breaking. And in this convergence, the boy perceived clarity in the currents. Preservation demanded mastery, mastery demanded command, and command demanded surrender to the dart. Visions unfolded in crystalline sequences. Systems reshaped, enemies subdued, innocence preserved, yet bonds shattered, loyalty tested, morality eroded, and always the whispering, step beyond hesitation, step beyond law, step beyond oath, become what the lattice demands. The boy must take the first irreversible act. With each vision, the pulse of destiny quickened, converging toward the moment where shadow and intent fused into form, and the boy became the instrument of what he had feared and desired, attachment. Now sharpened to clarity, demanded immediate action. The one he cherished, threatened in circumstance, illuminated the necessity of decisive intervention. The shadows whispered, patient, subtle, eternal, preserve, protect, master. Hesitation destroys, delay corrupts. The currents of the Force favor decisiveness, and in decisiveness lies both power and perdition. The boy felt the gravity of inevitability. Pressing inward, each heartbeat aligned with the rhythm of destiny. The phantom mentor's counsel had become certainty, tempered with the inevitability of consequence. The dark is not void, it is fulfillment, it is preservation, it is command. The boy must embrace or perish. The lattice yields to intent. To resist is to fracture, to act is to create. And so the boy's pulse aligned with the abyss, with the siren of power, with the shadow's patient insistence, until desire, fear, and mastery coalesced into the singular moment of irrevocable transformation. Fear, once teacher, now became instrument. Desire, once incentive, now became fuel. Attachment, once guidance, now became justification. The lattice of the Force trembled beneath the first step of the final crossing. And in meditation, the boy reached fully commanding currents of energy, intent, and consequence, shaping outcomes, preserving attachment, asserting mastery over life, death, and destiny. Each act carried illumination and shadow, preservation and fracture, the promise of power and the cost of trust, visions sharpened to focus, an entire galaxy trembling beneath his will, systems reshaped, enemies defeated, allies preserved, innocence maintained but bonds strained, morality eroded, trust fractured, and in the quiet, patient, eternal, the shadows whispered, "The boy has stepped into the dark." The lattice of destiny bends. The first irreversible currents flow. Observe, for the galaxy holds its breath, and the boy becomes the instrument of the dark. The Jedi's voice, once absolute, became faint, distant, incapable of guiding amid the immediacy of fear, attachment, and desire. Patience, law, restraint all were distant echoes, insufficient to preserve what the heart deemed sacred. The boy understood that mastery, command, and the fulfillment of what was cherished demanded the ultimate step, the surrender to the dark, the relinquishing of hesitation, the full embrace of irrevocable choice, the first act of final crossing sight, decisive and inevitably code through the lattice of the Force. And in that act, the boy of shadow and flame became Darth Vader, the synthesis of attachment, fear, desire, and mastery, a being shaped equally by preservation and ruin. The shadows murmured, patient and eternal. The transformation is complete. The lattice of consequence bends beneath him. Observe, for he carries both salvation and terror, preservation and fracture. In equal measure, ancient voices resonated across holocrons, crystal, and memory. Mark the boy. Observe the birth of the dark. He is neither holy master nor holy servant, neither holy destroyer nor holy savior. Desire, fear, attachment, ambition, these converge in his pulse. The first irreversible currents of destiny flow through him. Light and shadow entwine in form. The galaxy trembles, and the abyss waits patiently, eternal. Watch, for the boy of shadow and flame now walks as Darth Vader, and the path of irrevocable consequence begins. Thus the boy, now fully the instrument of the dark, felt the abyss and the currents of the Force converge. Each heartbeat, each breath, each pulse of intent aligned with destiny. The galaxy quivered beneath unseen currents, the shadows whispered patiently, and the first tangible manifestation of irrevocable power had taken form. The boy had become the instrument of shadow and preservation, of fear and desire, of mastery and loss. He was Darth Vader, and the lattice of destiny shimmered, poised on the edge of revelation, terror, and fulfillment. Chapter 18, The Redemptions. Whisper, the Force moves not in fury alone, nor in conquest, nor in the calculated rhythm of shadowed intent. It moves also in silence, in subtle currents, in whispers that traverse time and destiny. For the one who had become instrument of the dark, whose pulse had merged with fear, attachment, and irrevocable choice, the whisper came not as accusation, not as command, but as promise, faint yet persistent, drawn through the lattice of the force itself. Redemption remains. It was a whisper carried by the sun, luminous yet untested, trembling yet steadfast. The boy of shadow and flame, Darth Vader, felt its resonance deep in marrow and intent. Each breath aligned with the tremor of memory, each pulse measured against bonds long strained, each heartbeat echoing with attachment and the cost of choices irrevocable. The whisper was faint, yet undeniable, threading through the lattice of consequence with precision and persistence. Visions, luminous and fragmented, unfolded in meditation. He saw futures, both lost and regained, the culmination of terror, the expanse of dominion, the consequences of irrevocable acts. And intertwined with these, he glimpsed possibility, the preservation of what remained dear, the undoing of fracture through courage and sacrifice, the shaping of destiny by conscious intent rather than blind surrender to shadow. The Force whispered, patient and eternal, the dark may guide, but the light may reclaim. Attachment long a crucible, long a compass, now resonated with the whisper. The sun, luminous in hope and defiance, became the axis upon which the possibility of renewal pivoted. Every fear that had once justified irrevocable acts now trembled against love. Every desire that had driven command and mastery now bent toward mercy. And in the quiet lattice of the Force, the boy-turned instrument perceived the weight of what might yet be restored. The shadows stirred, patient as eternity, observing, neither restraining nor condemning, yet illuminating the first tremors of reversal. The abyss had claimed the body, the dark had claimed the mind, yet the Force itself whispered insistently, intent may reshape the lattice, courage may unfracture bonds, sacrifice may redeem, and the sun, embodying the potential of both light and persistence, became the fulcrum upon which the lattice might bend toward restoration. Visions sharpened into premonition. Vader saw himself reflected, a convergence of fear, attachment, mastery, and irrevocable choice. He saw destruction wrought, bonds fractured, morality eroded. Yet he also glimpsed paths, narrow and treacherous, where decisive acts might restore what had been lost, where attachment could be preserved without surrendering all to shadow. And the whisper threaded through these visions with crystalline clarity. You may choose to act, to redeem, to preserve. You may shape the lattice anew. The Force itself pulsed in alignment with this possibility. The currents of fear, desire, and mastery, once convergent in shadow, now quivered under the weight of hope, filial and eternal. The boy-turned instrument, Darth Vader, perceived the lattice of consequence in its totality, irrevocable acts intertwined with mutable potential, bonds fractured yet not destroyed, shadows deep yet penetrable, and within this trembling lattice, the whisper persisted. Redemption is possible. The path is narrow. Courage must prevail. Memories of attachment, once justification for transgression, now illuminated the fulcrum of potential, the sun. Every pulse of fear, every tremor of attachment, every whisper of love became an axis of choice. The dark had shaped body and mind, yet the light shaped intent, and intent now bore weight in ways unseen until the final moment. The lattice of consequence responded, subtly, faithfully, reverently. The sun may guide, and the instrument may yet return. The shadows whispered patiently. The Force pulsed with quiet awareness, and in the convergence of sun and father, light and shadow, irrevocable act and conscious choice, The prophecy was fulfilled in ways both unexpected and eternal. The chosen one realized not solely in destruction nor in fear, but in the quiet, sacrificial reclamation of balance, love, and the enduring lattice of the Force.